Hello and welcome to tonight's event. Welcome to Powell City of Books. You can check out our exciting lineup of events by going to our website, powells.com. Starting in April or next month, since this month is not halfway over, but starting to get there, we'll begin hosting an assortment of in-person events as well. So when looking at the events page, you can note whether or not it's virtual or actually list the store location, because us here at Powell's do not want you to be disappointed. Tonight, we are excited to welcome Thom Hartmann back to Portland and Powell's. Thom Hartmann is the 4-time winner of the Project Censor Award, a New York Times bestselling author of 33 books, and America's #1 progressive talk radio show host. His show is syndicated on local for-profit and nonprofit stations and broadcast nationwide and worldwide. It is also simulcast on the television in nearly 60 million US and Canadian homes. He is here to discuss his newest book, The Hidden History of Big Brother in America. In The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, Thom reveals how the government and corporate America misuses our personal data and shows us how we can reclaim our privacy. Most Americans are worried about how companies like Facebook invade their privacy and harvest their data, but many people don't fully understand the details of how their information is being adapted and misused. In this thought-provoking and accessible book, Thom Hartmann reveals exactly how the government and corporations are tracking our every online move and using our data to buy elections, employ social control, and monetize our lives. Hartmann uses extensive, vivid examples to highlight the consequences of big data on all aspects of our lives. He traces the history of surveillance and social control, looking back to how Big Brother invented whiteness to keep order and how surveillance began to be employed as a way to modify behavior. As he states, the goal of those who violate privacy and use surveillance is almost always social control and behavior modification. Along with covering the history, Hartmann shows us how we got to where we are today, how China, with its new social credit system, serves as a warning, and how we can and must avoid a similar dystopian future. By diving.
Call me at extension 1457 inconvenience and
Sorry about that. I must have looked at the other way. By diving into the constitutional right to privacy, Hartmann reminds us of our civil right and shows how we can restore it. Tonight's event will include a Q&A portion where I'll have the honor of relaying your questions to Thom. So please ask any questions down in the Q&A box below or set up in the chat box where I'll be able to find them easier. If you see any questions that you would like to know the answer to, please click the like button so I can know that this is a question that isn't to be missed. During the event, I'll be dropping the links to Thom's books in the chat during tonight's event. So that way you can click on the links to support him and Powell's books. Now, please give a warm welcome to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you all for showing up tonight. It's great to be back here at Powell's, virtually, but great, my favorite bookstore in the world. And living here in Portland, it's a real treat. So in this book, when I first sat down to write the book, it was like, how do I organize this? And what I came up with were in 2 broad categories that the book deals with, and then kind of a third peripheral category that touches on both of those. And the 2 broad categories are government big brother, the George Orwell kind of state where the government, tells us how to think and punishes us if we don't think the right way and that sort of thing. And corporate big brother, where giant corporations, nameless, faceless corporations are exploiting us or manipulating us or trying to control our behavior, as governments do as well, and how they do it and how they get away with it. And then that third kind of tertiary category is the political aspect of it, because politics involves both. You've got big money corporate players, and of course, politicians run governments. So just to begin at the beginning, I start the book, first of all, with the story of how powerful Big Brother has become, how, in the cyber world, as it were. And it's the story of Donald Trump's candidacy in 2016. And, I'm not going to dwell on it at length. In fact, I don't in the book. It's only a few pages. But Brittany Kaiser gave us an awful lot of this information. She was the director of business development at Cambridge Analytica. And they scraped what they claimed were 4,000 data points on each of 230 million Americans off Facebook for the for the Trump campaign in 2016 and the Ted Cruz campaign in 2018. And Mark Zuckerberg came out and said, no, it's not 230 million Americans, it's 87 million Americans. But that's, you know, kind of a distinction, a difference without it, or whatever the cliche is, you know what I mean? But she wrote an article, Brittany Kaiser, in 2019 for Fast Company magazine titled, "If Trump Wins in 2020, Blame Facebook." And it really was, you know, because Trump won in 2016, you can blame Facebook. She said that campaigns like his, quote, chose to dance on the line of our legal system, pushing the boundaries of hate speech and disinformation that would normally be considered illegal. Incitement of racial hatred, for example, would land most normal people in jail, but it's allowed to proliferate on Facebook and other social media platforms paid for by politicians and their supporters. The Trump campaign, she wrote in 2016, spent over $100 million promoting lies about Hillary Clinton and suppressing Democratic turnout. And the technique of suppression, voter suppression, was particularly fascinating. They identified largely two categories of people: one, African-American voters, and two, past Democratic voters who had a, quote, weak preference for Hillary. And they would target these people with two basic messages. The message going into the Black community was Hillary, with her, it was always quoting her super predator comments, "Hillary is not your friend, and she's just a phony." And the message going into the weak preference for Clinton, and there was a lot of overlap, by the way, in these two groups, was that it doesn't matter which party you vote for. Both parties are equally corrupt. Don't even bother showing up at the polls. And this produced a really consequential result. They combined these two messages with individualization at a super granular level. Like, you know, people who own motorcycles got a different version of one of these messages than people who drove luxury cars, than people who owned a bicycle, than people who like to walk, or people who smoked a certain brand of cigarette, or people who had had a particular disease in the past, or people who had a particular sexual orientation or gender identity, whatever it may be. I mean, literally, this is Icy Lepowski writing for Wired magazine. On any given day, the Trump campaign was running 40 to 50,000 variations of its ad. That's 50,000 different variations on one ad in one day. On the day of the third presidential debate in October, the team ran 175,000 variations. That's how granular, how able they were to influence people. And when you consider, then they looked at the impact of this, you know, did this work? And taking as an example, and there are other states that are good examples too, but Wisconsin, for example, in Wisconsin, more than half of all the voters on the database marked for deterrence were Asian, Black, or Latino, with particularly high percentages in predominantly Black neighborhoods in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida. And so if you look at the numbers in Wisconsin, keep in mind, Donald Trump won Wisconsin by 27,000 votes. Okay, just hold that number in your head for a second, 27,000. Just District 15 of Milwaukee, a large, 84% Black. Voter turnout declined by 19.5% over the previous presidential election. That, again, Trump won Wisconsin by 27,000 votes, but there were that 19.5% meant there were 60,000 fewer votes for Clinton than there had been for Obama 4 years earlier, than cast in 2012, which is, was enough to make the margin. So I start out with that just by way of saying, this is how much they know about us and how potent this information can be used to modify our behavior. From there, I stepped back into the history of Big Brother. There were two eras in the United States, both regional, where government, where what you might call democratic government, what you might call free speech or freedom by our contemporary definitions, just pretty much did not exist broadly. Obviously it didn't exist for African Americans in the United States throughout our history and arguably up till this day. We just yesterday, the Senate finally passed an anti-lynching bill. But in a larger sense, in the South, by the middle of the 1830s, the South, for even white people, had ceased to be a democracy. The ballot boxes were routinely stuffed. There were about 1,000 families, large plantation owners, oligarchs, essentially, who controlled all of the states that became the Confederacy. They did not tolerate dissent. People who spoke up, and again, I'm talking white people here because Black people were enslaved, but white people who spoke up against them were routinely murdered, imprisoned, beaten, ostracized. The elections by the mid 1830s had ceased to have much meaning at all in the South, and by 1850, the South was an absolute fascist police state. It no longer even pretended to be a democracy, and because, first of all, it had been a police state with regard to poor whites and African Americans and Blacks for centuries. You can't maintain slavery. You can't hold people in enslavement without a police state. It's just not possible. But then, as the oligarchs emerged, and there's a whole backstory to this that I told, when I did this Powell's, you can probably find the old video of it from my book, The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, where I detail how this happened as a result of the invention of the cotton gin and its wide popularization in the 1920s or 1820s, excuse me. So number one, we had a police state in the South. So the Civil War was not a war between two democracies. It was a war between an oligarchy in the South, a police state, a fascist police state oligarchy in the South, and a functioning democracy in the North. To the extent that, only half the population voting, the male half, could be called a democracy, but nonetheless, for what it was at the time. And the democracy won. The Republican form of government won, which I would argue is a really good thing, because the whole world was holding its breath throughout the the first 4 years of the 1860s. At the time, there were only 5 functional democracies in the world, as I recall. So there was that. And then there was also up in the North, in the Northeast, particularly Massachusetts and New Hampshire, there was the theocracy. The right-wing preachers, most of them taking a cue from the Puritans, and the Pilgrims had basically taken over these states. You had to go to church. If you failed to go to church, you could be whipped, you could be put in the stocks, you could be taxed. You were taxed for it. You were taxed anyway toward the church in many parts of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Massachusetts almost didn't join the Union because the urge for theocracy was so strong, and the First Amendment of the Constitution basically prevented America from being, any state, from being a theocracy. And so I use the story as a kind of a skeletal device for that chapter of John Greenleaf Whittier's poem, The Women Who Came from Dover. And it's the story of 3 young women who were Quakers, who were unwilling to go to church, and they were singled out by this one particular pastor who was very irate with them. And this was the dead of winter. There was 4 feet of snow on the ground, and he ordered them tied by the wrists to the back, the 3 of them, to the back of a cart, stripped naked to the waist, and whipped until bloody in Dover, New Hampshire, and then dragged by this cart through the snow to the next town. And they did this through a series of towns before finally a police officer in one of the towns stopped them. And Whittier wrote this famous poem about it that still is, well known. And it was a real instance. I mean, we also had, so in the Northeast, you had a theocratic big brother, to use Orwell's phrase. And in the South, you had a dynastic oligarchic big brother that exteded basically across everybody. So that's, the American experiment with Big Brother. Then, of course, we had J. Edgar Hoover, who knew everybody's secrets and was blackmailing half the politicians in America. He himself was being blackmailed by Santo Trafficante because he was gay, and him and his lover, Clyde Tolson, would go down to Hialeah every year, and Trafficante would put them up and give them money to gamble at his racetracks and things like that. So we've had our brushes with it, and during the McCarthy era as well. So that's kind of the history part of it. In the government context, right now, China is experimenting with something that they're calling their social credit system. And the Chinese social credit system is particularly fascinating. People, this is from the book from page 143. People who score poorly. First of all, you score poorly if you haven't promptly paid your bills, haven't promptly paid your taxes, engage in offensive speech in public or online, play loud music on public transit, don't show up for restaurant or hotel reservations, are caught smoking in non-smoking areas. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of behavior that lowers your social ranking in China right now. And as I note in the book, people who score poorly can lose their ability to travel. China blocked 29 million air tickets and 6 million high-speed rail tickets in 2019 based on these scores. You can become unable to book a restaurant or hotel reservation. Your internet slows down. You could lose your ability to get high status jobs or even enroll your children in high quality private schools or universities. If you have a higher social credit score, you get better and faster reservations, preferred access to schools, shorter waits at hospitals and doctors' offices, discounts across a broad range of products and services, and better employment offers, excuse me. The Chinese say, quote, if trust is broken in one place by one individual, restrictions are imposed on that individual everywhere. This is the position of the Chinese government, to create kind of a homogeneity. Also, if you have a very low social score, your face can show up online on billboards or even as a wall of shame type of thing in public theaters prior to movie showings, where they just run through faces and names of people that have low social scores in the local community. You can redeem yourself. You can raise your social score by giving blood, by volunteering for social activities, and by praising the government on social media, although it can take between 2 and 5 years to recover your social media score. That is, I think very much the direction we don't want to go, but we have a bunch of companies in the private sector that seem, really committed to taking us in that direction. And a lot of fascinating stuff happening in this. For example, there's this isn't necessarily a company that's trying to turn us into China, but this is the infrastructure that would be necessary for that. There's a company called Clearview AI. It came out of a 2017 meeting between 3 Trump supporters who had this idea of scraping billions of pictures off Facebook and other social media sites and combining it with a spiffy new facial recognition algorithm that one of them had developed. And they rolled this thing out. This product, even though Facebook was very upset, said this is a violation of the terms of service, but the people had already scraped the pictures and converted them into digital face prints. And as the New York Times reported, they had made the app available to investors, potential investors, and business partners, including a billionaire who used it to identify his daughter's date when the couple unexpectedly walked into a restaurant where he was dining. So, I mean, just imagine this. You walk into a bar, the person next to you surreptitiously takes your picture with their phone, plugs it into the app, and now they literally know everything about you. Every bit of data that's on the internet that's in your history or that has been scraped together by data processing companies. And that many of these companies brag that they have 20 to 30,000 data points on each one of us. So you sit down at the bar and the person next to you, knows the book you read last week, knows your favorite drink because they know what you ordered at the bar last time because they have access to your credit card records, or the company does, knows where you live, knows who you're married to, knows if you've ever been divorced. I mean, basically knows everything about you, and they just start talking to you like that. And it could be a little creepy. This is what happened to the boyfriend of this billionaire's daughter. And the billionaire came over and started telling this kid about his own life. And he was like, whoa, what are you, God? And so that product is now being used by more than 3,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States and in at least 27 countries. So it's like begun, right? Microsoft recently rolled out a product in this category. It's called Microsoft Azure. In June 2021, they said that their product can not only identify people, but, quote, can detect anger, contempt, disgust, fear, happiness, neutral feelings, sadness, and surprise. A Russian company, Tech Lab, rolled out an app like this called Find Face in 2016. And as the New York Times noted, quote, within months of its release, this was average people had access now to this product. Within months of its release, it was reported that people were using the app to identify sex workers, porn stars, and protesters. Today, it's installed on government-run surveillance cameras all over Moscow and every other Russian city. So you can see where this has the potential to go, and it's not a great place. Also, with regard to government Big Brother, there's the issue of warfare. What would war look like when these kinds of tools, the surveillance, what are initially were surveillance tools, get rolled into the warfare space? Everybody, not everybody, but many people remember the old Stuxnet virus that the United States and Israel is a super, web-based weapon that we injected into the Iranian centrifuges back in the day. It caused $76 million of damage. Excuse me, no, it wasn't 76 million. It basically destroyed Iran's centrifuges and shut down their nuclear program. They were seriously pissed off about this. This was in 2010. And at that time, the Iranian government was budgeting $76 million a year for cybersecurity. After Stuxnet, they raised their budget to $1 billion. They recruited 1,200 personnel into the Iranian Guard, the IRGG, their military. And Iran claimed to be the fourth largest cyber power in the world. And it wasn't like they were just kind of sitting back. They were very upset. On August 15th, 2012, they went after Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had been trash talking them in the media, and they went after Saudi Aramco, irretrievably destroying 30,000 computers all around the world that were affiliated with, connected to, or owned by Saudi Aramco, leaving only an image of a burning American flag on every monitor's screen. Then they went after a 245-foot, 800-foot long dam here in Oregon, the Arthur R. Bowman Dam, which is, it backs up the Crooked River, and it's right down, it's upriver from Pineville, Oregon. If that dam was to open rapidly and just, allow a gush of water, it would have pretty instantly drowned thousands of people and destroyed this little town. And so the Iranians thought they'd hack it and create chaos here in Oregon, of all places. Fortunately for us, they, instead of hacking the Arthur R. Bowman Dam in Oregon, they hacked the Bowman Avenue Dam in New York State, which dams up a little stream, and the sluice gate was offline for maintenance. So they jammed up the dam and crashed its computers and everything, but nobody died, nobody was hurt. So in response to that, and the Wall Street Journal, for example, Danny Yadron wrote, America's power grid, factories, pipelines, bridges, and dams, all prime targets for digital armies, are all sitting largely unprotected on the internet. The Iranians also came after Shelley Adelson, the famous, he owned the sands, big friend of Israel, billionaire, major donor to right-wing causes, big supporter of Donald Trump. He's passed away. His wife is still, carrying the flag. And also best buds with Benjamin Netanyahu. And he gave a speech at Yeshiva University in New York, where he basically said, it's time to bomb Iran. He said, Adelson said, quote, "You want to be wiped out? Go ahead and take a tough position." And, the response to this was that the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said, somebody should slap these prattling people in the mouth. Well, 2 weeks later, the Iranian Guard struck, and every drive in the casino, 2 weeks later, all the computers at the Sands, Adelson's Hotel Casino, died totally. Every hard drive wiped out, every screen showing a photo of Adelson and Netanyahu with the inscription, "Don't let your tongue cut your throat." The computers might as well have been boat anchors. Bricked is the word that hackers use for this. So as a result of this, the Obama administration said, okay, we've got to get ready for this. And they put forward legislation that would require all privately owned, quote, essential infrastructure in the United States to harden their cyber capabilities. This law passed the House of Representatives. It would mean all, like our electricity here in Portland comes from PG&E, which is a private company. It would require PG&E to harden their cyber capabilities so that Iranians, Russians, whatever, couldn't get in here and just bring it all down. And similarly, all across the country, water systems, septic systems, electric systems, other utilities, toll roads, bridges, dams. It passed the House of Representatives, but as the New York Times reported, Senate Republicans argued that it was too burdensome for business. By late July, they managed to change the legislation to make it optional. So then the House voted on it again and said, okay, it's optional. And then in August, the bill died when it was blocked by a Republican filibuster. So frustrated, Obama then created a new office within the White House, the Office of Cybersecurity. And he hired a guy to run this thing. His last name was Daniels. Forgive me for not remembering his first name. And by this time, as Nicole Perlroth writes in her book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, she said Russian hackers had made their way inside more than 1,000 companies in more than 84 countries, the vast majority of them American. Russian hackers had infected the software updates that reached the industrial controllers inside hydroelectric dams, nuclear power plants, pipelines, and the power grid, and were now inside the very computers that could unleash the locks of the dams, triggering an explosion or shut down the grid. And she quoted somebody saying, "Moscow is preparing the battlefield." So this is in fact what Moscow did to Ukraine back in 2015 and again in 2017. It was the busiest shopping day of the year, 2015. Russia took down Ukraine, literally took them down. Their main power station, the people working there, all they could do was stare helplessly at his screen while the ghosts in the machine clicked open one breaker after another, eventually taking out 30 substations offline. They didn't stop there. They struck 2 other power distribution centers at the same time, nearly doubling the number of substations taking offline and leaving more than 250,000 residents in the dark. They were eating Ukraine's computers alive. It would hit at least 4 hospitals in Kyiv alone, 6 power companies, 2 airports, 22 Ukrainian banks, ATMs and card payment systems, in retailers and transport, and practically every federal agency. The government was dead, reported the New York Times. About 10% of all the computers in Ukraine were bricked, were permanently destroyed. More than 300 companies shut down. Checkout systems in stores shut down. Gas pumps stopped working, bank access, everything. They even took down the monitoring systems at Chernobyl, which really freaked them out. So the response to that, this was in 2017. Now, when this happened, keep in mind, Obama had created the Office of Cybersecurity to prevent that from happening here. And the response to that from the Trump administration was decisive. That happened in June of 2017. 2017. So in early 2018, Donald Trump ordered that the Office of Cybersecurity be shut down. And he ended the job of its then director, Rob Joyce, fired him. That was the end of that. John Bolton explained why. He said that they were, quote, eliminating another layer of bureaucracy that delivers greater decision, activity, secrecy, and dispatch. He was quoting Thomas Paine, actually. But what we learned after Trump left office was that Russian hackers had actually embedded themselves into the Treasury Department, into the Commerce Department, and we really don't know how many other departments in our government that these hackers have put themselves. Trump also fired Chris Krebs. He was the head of the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Agency, a separate agency from the one Obama had created that Trump shut down altogether. And he just fired it. He decapitated it, essentially. Contradicting his Secretary of State and other top officials, President Donald Trump suggested without evidence that China, not Russia, was the foreign government that was inside our computers, inside the United States. So this is kind of where we're at with regard to the government side of this. On the private side of this, we've got now all these companies that are making a very good living, thank you very much, by collecting all the data they can on us, on you and me and everybody else, and using it not just to make sure, not just so, landlords can know that you haven't bounced checks recently or that sort of thing. I mean, that doesn't sound illogical, but to actually alter our behavior, to modify our behavior. And this is substantial, the data that they have on us. The Trump administration caused America to be in a very unique category around the world. We're the only developed country in the world where the company that brings the internet into your house can literally monitor everything you do, every single keystroke, every page you visit, how long you look at particular pictures or articles or ads, where you go, what you type in, every email you send and receive, everything, literally everything that you do on your computer can be monitored, recorded, and sold by your internet service provider. The process that they did that allowed this was called ending net neutrality. It happened about 4 years ago. It was done by Ajit Pai. He was the head of the FCC. He was a former lawyer for Verizon, and celebrated by Donald Trump and his buddies. And so number one, you've got your internet service providers have us if they want us. And nobody really knows what they're doing with all this information. More than half of all internet usage in the United States is in the hands of just two companies. In fact, more than 2/3 of it, just two companies. And they're not telling us what they're doing with this data. And we don't know, if it's just being used for commercial purposes, if it's just being used for tracking where people go, or if, somebody at one of these companies decides that one of us is a particularly problematic person and part of our browsing history might be embarrassing, or one of our emails might just pop up someplace. Who knows? Nobody knows. Europe has responded to this sort of thing with some really rigorous privacy laws, not just guidelines. And it's illegal for an internet service provider to do that in Europe. It's illegal for websites to track you at that granular level in Europe. You probably noticed as you surf the web, increasingly over the last couple of years, websites are saying, will you accept cookies from us? That's a requirement of the new European privacy standards. And that's why it's popping up here. These are websites that also have significant user bases in Europe. And they don't want to be on the receiving end of the law, as it were. So let's see here. Would you, if you're looking for a job, HireVue is a company that claims that they have, quote, 20,000 data points on pretty much everybody in the United States. And this includes, quote, and I'm quoting from their website, the content of the verbal response, intonation, and nonverbal communication. In other words, what kind of person are you? What kind of personality do you have? This is the kind of information, 20,000 data points on you, on every one of us, 20,000 data points. And, their services are sold to big companies like Walgreens, Hyatt's, Wendy's. And, it's, if you're thinking of getting a job, what if you want to return a product you bought? Well, there's this company called Sift, and they come up with a score based on more than 16,000 data points on each one of us. And there's another company, Retail Equation. It's used in 34,000 stores in the United States, including Best Buy, Home Depot, and Sephora, however you say that. Once you're flagged by them, you're unable to return products, for example. They can also prevent you from buying things in these stores, in fact. Zeta Global is another company. They have a database of more than 700 million people with an average of 2,500 pieces of data per person. This data includes the number of times a customer has dialed a customer service call center, whether that person has browsed a competitor's website or searched certain keywords in the past few days. Among others, they provide customer scores to mobile phone companies. So how long are you going to wait on hold when you call your cell phone company for some help, or your airline? Well, these kind of scores will tell the company whether you're worth bothering with or not, basically. How granular is this? Well, this is just from Facebook. When you're on Facebook, you're connected to their computer in real time, continuously. And so they can monitor your keystrokes. And by how quickly or slowly you type on particular words or gathering particular thoughts, they can, and not to mention the content of what you're typing, but Facebook likes, phone data, and typing patterns that are gathered by Facebook. They can predict with 95% accuracy your ethnicity, 93% accuracy your gender, 88% accuracy your sexual orientation. So you've never told them this stuff. They're just inferring this from this data that they're able to gather by the way you type. Your political views, 85% accuracy, your religion, 82% accuracy, your sexual orientation, 75% accuracy, nicotine and alcohol usage, 70% accuracy, your relationship and type of relationship with others, 67%, drug usage, 65%, whether your parents are divorced, they can predict that with 60% accuracy. By the way you type, the rhythm of your keyboard typing, they claim that with 83% accuracy, they can predict your level of self-confidence. With 82% accuracy, they can predict your level of hesitancy. With 83%, they can tell how nervous you are, your level of nervousness. 77% accuracy, your level of relaxation. 88% accuracy, your sadness. There's actually people who want to market to sad people or don't want to market to sad people, depending on their product. 84% accuracy, whether or not you're tired. There's another piece to this, and this is these contraptions called stingrays. Stingrays operate in what's called a man-in-the-middle operation. It's sort of like what I just told you about your internet service provider. You know, that in order to get into the internet, you've got to go through the servers at your internet service provider, and in the process, they can see everything you're doing. Well, usually your cell phone is pinging a cell phone tower, and it's you in the cell phone tower. And actually, when you're talking on a cell phone, now the data is, there's no protection for your data. You know, anything you do on the internet on your cell phone is because of Ajit Pai and Donald Trump can be completely monitored and recorded even by your cell phone company, because there's no protection for data in the United States. But we still have protection for phone calls. And this goes back to the 1930s. That law, it's called Title II of the Telecommunications Act. That law is still in effect. So if you make a phone call, the phone company can't listen into it without a warrant from the government. You know, you have to have a search warrant, or not only can the phone company not listen in on it, the police can't, and they can't monitor it. And so you have to get a warrant. But the data, no, it's the Wild West for data. Well, what stingrays are is they are devices that pretend to be cell towers. They actually connect to a real cell tower out there and bring in both the phone ability and the data ability. And then they ping out to any phone that happens to be walking by saying, "Hi, I'm a cell tower," even though they're not. And so your phone, thinking that, oh, it's Verizon, or oh, it's T-Mobile, your phone connects to the stingray. The stingray, you go through the stingray and you're connected to the internet, you're connected to telephones. So it all seems normal. Your phone works just fine, except it seems to get a little warmer than usual because the stingray now is inside your phone and it can download everything on your phone. I learned about this back when I lived in Washington, D.C. I used to walk home every day by the White House. And once I got within about 2 blocks of the White House, my phone would start getting hot and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I eventually, when the stories started coming out about stingray devices, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, you know, and then the New York Times outed the fact that they had several governments, the Israeli government was the one that got busted, had stingrays around the White House. Which made me wonder what happened when Trump was president, because he refused to use a secure phone. He was just using a regular, you know, garden variety Android phone throughout his presidency. And God only knows what the stingrays got on him. But these things are now in use in, let me give you the exact details. It's on page 44 here. In 2018, the American Civil Liberties Union reported it identified 75 agencies in 27 states in the District of Columbia that own stingrays. And, you know, they're just all over the place. So bottom line, you know, I think here is that we've got some serious work to do with regard to privacy. Oh, which reminds me, the one last thing I forgot to tell you. Why is the word privacy not in the Constitution? Why is it that it wasn't until 1965 that the US Supreme Court recognized a right to privacy? And the reason is kind of funny, actually. I had to do some digging to find this, and that was through old library books from the 1700s. But it turns out that, you know, before Thomas Crapper popularized the flush toilet in the 1860s, and people started putting toilets inside their houses. Most homes or many homes had, the outhouse outside the house. Or even if it was inside the house, as it was in some fancy houses, it was like in a remote part of the house where the smell wouldn't stink up the house. And so the way that you would say, I need to use the toilet, what we would call a toilet, is you would say, excuse me, I need some privacy. Privacy, I literally did a search on all 20 volumes, they're digitized now, all 20 volumes of the collected writings of Thomas Jefferson, all 13 volumes of the collected writings of John Adams, all of the writings of Thomas Paine, all of the writings of Alexander Hamilton. And I found one reference to the word privacy, and it was by Alexander Hamilton. It was actually in Federalist 69, where he was complaining that the governor of New York was selected in private, in secret, by 3 people. Which was true. It was an appointed position at the time. And so he said, in private, in privacy, actually, he said, which meant, in dastardly secrecy, like as if they had hidden in the bathroom. So the founders actually did write the right to privacy into the Constitution. It's in the First Amendment, your right to speak or not to speak, your right, to peaceably assemble, things like that. It's in the Third Amendment, your right not to have soldiers quartered in your house. It's in the Fourth Amendment, your right to be secure in your persons, papers, and effects and in your home. It's in the Fifth Amendment, your right not to incriminate yourself. And it's arguably in the Ninth Amendment, which says that, any power is not, Ninth or 10th, any power is not taken by this government revert back to the people, and then ultimately to the states also. So in 1961, there was a case in 61 was the year birth control pills were legalized in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration. And many states had laws making it illegal for anybody to own any kind of birth control device, including condoms. And in 1961, that law was tested. It was actually the Connecticut law was tested, and before the Supreme Court by a married couple. And the Supreme Court said, no, Connecticut passed this law. They can have this law. There is no right to privacy in the Constitution. Tough luck. And in 1965, that law came back again in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. Excuse me. And this was a married couple who wanted to have condoms in their bedroom. And it was illegal in Connecticut in 1965. And the Supreme Court, in that case, for the very first time, went back and read the Constitution and said, even though they don't use the word privacy, that Fourth Amendment thing, sure does look like privacy. And that, of course, set the stage for a far clearer definition of privacy, the rights of privacy and where they come from in 1973 in the Roe v. Wade decision. That, a woman's right to privacy includes the right to bodily autonomy, at least until the viability of the fetus, or at least until the end of the first trimester. That was, subsequently in the Planned Parenthood v. Casey case was added on. So I guess that's my rant on the book. There's all the details, of course, are in the book, and there's a whole lot I didn't even get to. So, but I'll toss it back to Catherine now.
All right, let's get started for some questions. Martha would like to know, does using a VPN service help at all in being tracked?
Yes, although be careful. We have learned, I used a particular, when Louise and I back about 5 years ago or so, went down to Cuba for a week with Medea Benjamin's Code Pink group. I got a VPN, to go with me, because in Cuba, there's a whole bunch of American websites you can't visit using the Cuban internet. And it turned out that the VPN that I had gotten was apparently sponsored by a foreign government. So the VPN can play man in the middle too. This is not intended as a shameless plug, but I know this only because ExpressVPN is a sponsor of my program and has been for over 5 years on and off. And that particular company, and I believe this is true of probably many of the VPN companies, but you want to read their fine print. They literally, because a VPN company has the ability to play that man in the middle role, ExpressVPN literally does not have the capability of recording the data that is passing through their servers. They don't have, hard drives attached to them or whatever it would take. So if you're using a VPN, that will gain you privacy from your internet service provider. Many internet service providers will block you if you use a VPN or slow you down if you use a VPN by way of punishing you. But in addition to that, you want to make sure that the VPN you're using actually gives you privacy and isn't themselves selling your data. Some of the ones that are free or some of the ones that are super cheap, there's a reason why they're free.
Kathy has a similar question, but she also wants to know if search engines like DuckDuckGo will also protect your ISPN or ISP.
Yeah, DuckDuckGo. I had the founder of the company on my show back years ago when they first started, and DuckDuckGo is pretty vigorous about protecting the privacy of their users. They keep some general data, you know, about terms that are searched, but not in a way that it could ever be traced back to any individual. Which is the complete opposite of Google. Of course, they're helping every single thing you do is helping build your profile in their database.
Kurt would like to know, would you say that these weak preferences for Hillary Clinton voters would be the heirs of the Nixon silent majority voters who were blue-collar Democrat voters but went for Nixon and the Republican Party after Kent State?
Yeah, probably. Or the Bush voters who voted for Trump or for Obama, rather. I'm not sure what data points they used to, and we'll never know because Cambridge Analytica isn't telling and Facebook isn't telling, and the Trump campaign is certainly not telling. So we'll never know exactly what data they used to determine that people were kind of on the fence about Hillary, but they definitely identified them, and by targeting them with ads. Keep in mind, I block a half a dozen of these trolls on Twitter every day, and we probably do 30 or 40 on our Facebook feed every day. The main message that the Russian trolls were using in the 2016 election, the media trolls. Now, we don't know about the ads because, like I said, those 40, 50,000 different ads a day, we only have a few dozen of them. But of the public messages that were in social media, and this is in the Mueller report, the main message that they promoted is there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans, so why bother voting? That was their main message.
All right. Looks like Bennett wants to know, considering the Supreme Court's dedication to free speech in quotations, over the past 30 years, flag burning, lying about one's medical records and campaigns, Westboro Baptist protests at soldiers' funerals, how can any lying or voter manipulation be unlawful?
How could lying be unlawful given that the Supreme Court's basically said whatever you do, whatever you say is okay. I mean, hate speech is okay until it's translated into behavior. It's like the question kind of has a non sequitur. Unless I'm misunderstanding, Catherine.
I'm not sure.
Or was it mean to be sarcastic or ironic, I suppose. The bottom line is that we have a problem, and this is another thing that I didn't get into. It used to be, and I'll be very brief here, but it used to be in the United States that the laws around the internet were the same as around your house, for example. For example, if you were to invite a bunch of strangers into your house, just put out a sign on the street that says, "Come on in, we're having a party," and you're sitting in your living room, and over in one corner there's somebody beating the crap out of somebody, and over in another corner there's somebody raping somebody, and in the back room there's somebody shooting up heroin, and it's just like total awful stuff going on in your house, and the police come crashing into your house. You get arrested for what's going on in your house, in addition to all those people, but you would get arrested too for hosting that party. Well, that was the law as it related to the internet as well, right up until 1996. I started running forums for CompuServe in the early 1980s. In 1981, Nigel Peacock and I, who is still my webmaster now, he lives in the UK and he's an old friend. And we ran forums for CompuServe for a decade and a half, up until from 1981 to 1996. Made a pretty good living at it, actually, because CompuServe had to pay us to make sure that every single message that got posted on CompuServe, this was before there was an internet, this was before HTML was invented, hypertext markup language, that every single message was not something that was libelous or slanderous or criminal. And people, and there was no anonymity. We knew who everybody was because you had to have a credit card to get on CompuServe. In 1996, Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act, the whole Telecommunications Act of '96 was passed, which had just, massive consequences for America and the world. It ended the regulation of the ownership of radio stations, television stations, and newspapers. So suddenly all of our media, became within a decade owned by a handful of companies, fewer than a dozen companies, virtually all of our media, more than 90% of our media. But even worse, it said, if you hold a party on the internet and people come into your party and they're shooting heroin and killing people and raping people and swapping child porn, you don't have any responsibility for it anymore. Nothing to worry about. It's all good. You can't go to jail. And so now there's a movement to do something about this. Ron Wyden is probably the lead Democrat in the Senate who is pushing this. And weirdly, Josh Hawley is the lead Republican. He wrote a book about this. The second half of his book, I've read his book, and the second half of his book is kind of a screed about how liberals are trying to destroy America. But the first half is about this. And how it's just outrageous. So keep an eye on Ron Wyden and help him out whenever you can, and him and Bernie and some of these some good progressive Democrats are trying to do something about Section 230 that doesn't shut down or brown out the internet. But I mean, this is how Mark Zuckerberg became one of the richest men on earth, is by allowing these kind of parties in his house and not doing anything about it.
All right. Someone wants to know, how does our surveillance compare to the rest of the world? How have other small, it says democratic, but it says small d, democratic countries address this?
Most all of the developed countries of the world, the 34 most well-developed countries in the world, we're the only one that allows ISPs to spy on people. The European Union has adopted for all of its countries, has adopted these general data GDR. It's a 4-letter acronym. I'm sorry, I can't remember it, but a set of standards that companies have to comply with. So it's pretty damn hard to spy on people in Europe, although not impossible, obviously. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, some of these other countries, some of the countries that are in the process of transitioning from democracy into oligarchy and from oligarchy into kind of a soft neo-fascism, countries like India, the Philippines, Hungary, Poland. In those countries, there's very intrusive government spying. And in Russia, of course, and China, it's absolutely ubiquitous.
Someone wants to know if Verizon is known for slowing down service for customers who use a VPN.
I don't know.
Easy question. So Dan wants to know, is the Iranian capabilities you described well sourced in the book?
Yes, they are. Yeah, the book is well footnoted. There are no claims I make I can't back up.
Beautiful. Alan wants to know, is it true that the freezing/blocking Russian money has or will diminish the amount of Russian bots on Facebook or other places?
There was a one-day celebration where somebody on Twitter had posted, what were the top tweets or the top Facebooks or whatever it was, top social media posts yesterday and today, pre-sanctions, post-sanctions. And the pre-sanctions was all these right-wing sites, and the post-sanctions was just like normal stuff. That lasted for about 3 hours, the celebration, and then the bots were back. So, it may have some marginal impact, but frankly, I can just tell you my own personal experience because we've got, a fairly active social media presence with both Twitter and Facebook anyway, that I have not seen the bots going away.
Okay. Someone would like to know, have you heard that law enforcement is now using data from social media to predict where a crime will happen?
There have been a couple of efforts to do that kind of thing. There's a word for it or a phrase for it. Forgive me for not remembering it off the top of my head. It is mentioned in my book, but I don't know where right off the top, so I couldn't just grab it and read it to you. But I remember writing about it. I wrote the book a year ago. It takes a while from the time you write it until it gets published. What was that movie with Tom Cruise that was about that very scenario? I think that it has not been well received, shall we say, broadly. So
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. Yeah, thank you. So to the best of my knowledge, nobody's aggressively doing this. They are doing pattern analysis and arguably predictive pattern analysis, but not at the level of individuals being prone to crime.
Sandy would like to know, read the lower number of voters referred to. Was there any attempt to account for less Black voters for Hillary than for Obama because she was white?
I'm sure that that was a factor, and that was a factor that was amplified aggressively by the Trump campaign. To what extent that could be broken out, I'm not sure anybody has ever even tried, so I don't know.
Second to last question. Someone would like to know, Jay would like to know if you can disconnect Google from your Apple phone. Or is that a thing? I
think you could probably, unless you have Gmail. If you have Gmail, you're screwed. I mean, you know, they've got you. I tell the story in the book about I bought an RCA tablet for my studio because I wanted to be able to monitor CNN, and I wanted to put the Sling app on it and just have CNN in the studio so I could see breaking news while I'm on the air. And every step of the way, you know, it's got the Android operating system, and Google kept saying, "Would you please log in? Would you please log in? Here, log in to do this, log in to do that." And I kept saying, "No, no, no, skip, 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 skip." And then finally, I wanted to download the app for Sling. And to do that, I had to go to the Google store. And to get into the Google store, I had to sign in. Bingo, they've got me. So now they know everything on that tablet. And all I do is watch CNN, you know, 3 hours while I'm on the air, but still. So it's very hard. It's very hard.
I just imagine Gmail being like, "Nice try, Tom." Gotcha.
Exactly.
And then with 2 minutes to go, I thought we'd end on a hopeful note. There's a question and a compliment. Someone says, Susan says, there's lots of problems, but does your book offer solutions? What is the top solution? And then they would like to say, while it's sort of overwhelming to hear you talk about all these issues, they want to thank you for your wonderful books and amazing teachings about history.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I offer a number of solutions in the book. One is that we should adopt the European privacy standards. We should do that last week. Another is the My Privacy is Not for Sale bill that Ron Wyden was championing in the Senate. Needs to be revived. There's a chapter about it in the book. There's a concept in Europe, in the European privacy laws, called the right to be forgotten. This came out of a 2018 lawsuit. A fellow in Spain who had his property repossessed back in the late 90s or very early 2000s. He went through a rough patch in his life, got divorced, got, you know, just kind of fell apart, lost his property. And he discovered that when you Googled his name, he had a very weird, unusual even for Spain name, you know, with X's and A's and stuff in it. And that when you Googled his name, what came up was this god-awful, you know, financial history of his. And so he started petitioning Google to remove this from the search engine. And they just laughed at him. And so he did a lawsuit, took it to the court, you know, took it to the courts. And I don't recall if he won the lawsuit or if just the fact of the lawsuit caused the law to change. But the European Union passed a law saying that you have a right to be forgotten. And you can inform the search engines that you want all data or specific data about you to be removed, and they must do it. We can do that here.
And well, there's one good question at the end though. Someone wants to know, what's your next book?
The next book, which will be out in 6 months. In fact, I'm getting the line edited copy back from the publisher tonight. I've got 3 weeks, or I've got a week to turn it around and send it back to the typesetter. Is titled The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted the American Middle Class.
All right, that's all the questions we got. It is 6 o'clock. Everything is perfect.
Okay, Catherine and Tina, thank you so much for helping out here and everything that you've done, especially you, Catherine, playing a great MC role. And thank you for showing up tonight, all of you. It's really an honor to hang out with you all, and I hope the book finds a valuable home. I hope you find it useful.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. You can find Tom's book, this book, The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, and all of Tom Other's books here at powells.com. I'll drop a quick link into the chat so that way you can grab it if you want before we log off. But yeah, stay tuned for more Powell's events, whether in person or online, and we'll see you again very soon. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you, Catherine.